Manpower Minister Josephine Teo faces more calls from MPs to name and shame companies for unfair foreign hiring practices.
Could we soon watch debates live? Communications Minister Iswaran says the government has agreed in principle to live stream proceedings.
And in conversation with the Leader of the House, Indranee Rajah sits down with Dylan Ang for a roundup of the week in Parliament. It's 5:30 p.m. here in Singapore and it's the end of the work week. Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Olivia Quinn. I beg your pardon, it's 6 p.m. right now.
That's right. And I'm Haryanto Diman. We're coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. Now you can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
In Parliament today, according to Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Heng Swee Keat, a bill setting out details of provisions to meet additional expenditure amounting to $8 billion will be tabled in Parliament next month for debate.
This third supplementary supply bill will go through the usual parliamentary proceedings and has to be assented to by the President. DPM Heng was responding to several MPs who had asked whether the extra $8 billion in COVID-19 support announced last month would be debated in Parliament.
Well, also in Parliament, Manpower Minister Josephine Teo said the 400 firms placed under the Fair Consideration Framework watch list were identified through what she calls proactive surveillance.
These firms are on the watch list for having a high share of foreign PMETs compared to their industry peers or high concentrations of foreign hires from a single source country. Mrs. Teo was asked by various MPs why the 400 firms have not been named.
In the area of FCF, I've suggested of us publicizing, and of course many members of this House as well, if there are actually companies that have been recalcitrant, meaning after 1 year of rehabilitation or assistance, they have not improved, is there a problem publicizing this list of recalcitrant employers?
I think it goes back to what our objective is. If our objective is still to try and get them to improve their HR practices, what is a more effective way of doing so? Naming them or continuing to suspend their work pass privileges? I can share with Mr. Teo that in some instances, the companies have actually decided that it's not possible for them to meet up to these requirements, and they have decided to exit Singapore altogether. And you don't even need to name them. They find that this set of conditions is not what they would like to deal with. We accept that. And whether you name them or not wouldn't have made much of a difference. But the fact that you have curtailed their work pass privileges, that's what has really made the difference.
Mrs. Teo also took a question from opposition MP He Ting Ru about retrenchments and whether the public sector has laid off workers in recent months as the economy worsened.
Actually, public sector has leaned forward to bring hiring in advance of our needs. Quite a large number of the positions that are made available to job seekers are public sector having looked at their developmental plans and deciding that instead of hiring 6 months, 9 months later, bring it forward so that the job seekers can have a wider range of options and they can also have meaningful employment during this much more difficult time.
Now, MPs have spent the last week debating the government's response to COVID-19 and the many challenges we face.
That's right. Well, National Development Minister Desmond Lee telling the House, while Singaporeans are understandably concerned, the nation is starting from a position of strength.
This crisis is neither a pause nor a rewind for Singapore. Instead, if we face this with the right spirit, we can turn this to a fast forward. Reimagine new industries and markets for Singapore, learn new skills and discover new careers for ourselves and our children. And even as we deal with present challenges, we must prepare ourselves for the longer term. We must keep our resolve and look forward to emerging as a stronger society.
Meanwhile, there are increasing calls for parliamentary proceedings to be shown live for everyone to watch. Opposition leader Pritam Singh is among those in favour of such broadcasts.
Addressing the issue today, Communications and Information Minister Iswaran said the government agrees in principle to live streaming, but still holds reservations.
The debate in Parliament should be vigorous, but the tone should be sober. An element of cut and thrust is unavoidable, even necessary, because members want to show Singaporeans that their concerns are being expressed and questions asked and answered in Parliament. However, it is equally important that members come to grips with the issues and their complexities and not simply play to the gallery.
But it is our view that that element of theatre will be exposed also, and the public will conclude fairly quickly, if not immediately, fairly quickly, who is here to turn Parliament into a theatre and who is here to be serious about Parliament.
You know, Olivia, from references to the Titanic and Starship Enterprise to Mrs. Josephine Teo and even Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong having tearful moments, there have been so many key moments this week.
With a record 10 opposition MPs as well in Parliament, the debate on policy issues has been very passionate and vigorous. Well, Leader of the House, Ms. Indranee Rajah, sat down with our colleague, multimedia journalist Dylan Ang, to wrap up the week.
Good evening, Minister. Thanks for joining us. Now, before we dive deeper into the key issues debated in Parliament this week, what are your thoughts on the parliamentary performance of the newly elected MPs?
Well, I actually thought it was a good showing by all the new MPs on both sides of the House, whether it's front bench or back bench, and whether it be PAP MPs or opposition MPs. You could see that they were very passionate about the subject matters that they chose. Many had personal anecdotes. You know, they reflected issues which some of them, you know, got from their residents, and many of them from their life experience as well. So I think it was heartfelt, and it augurs well for the 14th Parliament.
Now, Minister, what do you think are three key issues that the government now has to tackle, you know, after the following the debate and concerns raised by MPs in the last few days?
Listening to the speeches and hearing the concerns from our citizens outside the chamber, I think that there are three key issues. The first is jobs, or I should say jobs, jobs and jobs, because that's very much at the top of people's minds. And obviously, when you have a global recession like the current one, and there's competition for jobs and resources, people obviously feel, you know, a sense of angst, insecurity, and they're really, really anxious if they look like they're going to be losing their job. So we have to put a lot of attention on that. Minister Josephine Teo had answered lots of parliamentary questions on that today, and also in her speech previous day. So that's the first one, jobs. The second is on a fair and just society. That has actually been the goal of Singapore from the time of independence. But what is fair and just in one era may not necessarily be the same in another era, because when we started off, I think large part of our population not so well off. However, as we have become more developed as a country, as our people too as their lives have improved, the gap between those who do well and the small group that's left behind stretches out. And we don't want that kind of inequality, and that's one of the reasons why we paid a lot of attention to it. In fact, in the 13th Parliament, when Parliament had prorogued and we came back with a debate on the President's address, even at that time, combating inequality was identified as an issue that has carried over into this term, into the 14th Parliament. So we must continue. And what's different is that in this term of Parliament, because of COVID-19, it made things worse. Those who are less advantaged felt the impact even more than those who have additional resources. Then I think the third thing is our sense of identity. Who are we as a people? What do we stand for? Are we united as a people? The direction that we want to move in? There's a sense of a generational, if not change, certainly a generational difference. Every generation has events that are particular to them. So you hear it in the language that is used, boomer, millennials, Gen Z. That's one way of classifying them. But it's also the kind of issues that are important to each group. So things which may be very important to the group 50 and above may not be so important to those in their 20s, and vice versa. But there may be some things which are universal. So it's getting that sense of that generational difference, and to make sure that no matter what, we are able to progress together as one people and united, not polarized.
Now, Minister Iswaran said earlier today that the government will consider the live streaming of Parliament. What are your specific thoughts on this? What are issues that need to be considered? Do you think, for instance, the global tech trend of other countries live streaming their proceedings, as well as the risk of parliamentarians playing to the gallery?
Right. So when Minister Iswaran spoke about it just now, he explained that we had reservations, which remain, but we are also cognizant of the fact that, we know that in this day and age, everything gets streamed, almost instantly. People want information almost immediately, and people want to see what's happening, what's going on as it happens. So we've taken that on board, and that's why we say that we will, prepared to make this move. But we have to study it and see how to implement it in a way that works well. What you don't want is, you don't want MPs playing to the gallery, as you rightly pointed out. But what you do want is people to be able to watch and to see, oh, this is how Parliament works, and this is how, this is the speech that so-and-so made, and this was the response that was given. Does it make sense? So, they're you have to hold things in balance, but what we want to do is do it in the right way.
Now, just to wrap up, what do you think of the tone displayed in the House over the past few days? Does it set a healthy precedent for future sittings?
And, well, I think what you've seen in the last few days is a new term of Parliament with new members finding their way. I've been in Parliament for a few terms now, and at the beginning of each term, especially when you see the newer members perform, you have to find that rhythm, that equilibrium. So, for example, some may ask a lot of questions, some may ask fewer. There'll be a bit of cut and thrust. I think definitely in this Parliament there'll be a lot more questions. I think people have seen that already. More clarifications being asked on speeches that are given on both sides. 2 ministers, by ministers, 2 MPs, and from opposition MPs to PAP MPs and vice versa. So we've seen that. I think we can expect more of it. What I hope will happen is that everyone gets better at it, so that in terms of time management and in terms of really being able to crystallize the issue and get the thing spot on, that is something that will improve over time. It's inevitable. It's like when you go to a new school and then you meet your classmates for the first time. People are making friends, getting to know each other, the little bit of jostling here and there. Then after a while, everybody settles and moves ahead.
Well, thank you, Minister, for taking the time to speak with us.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
An update on the COVID-19 situation here. 40 new cases were confirmed today, with 0 in the community. There are, however, 3 imported cases who have been placed on stay-home notices upon their arrival in Singapore.
Now, 2 new clusters in dormitories were announced last night. Cochrane Lodge 2 was linked to 14 cases, while 8 newly confirmed cases were linked to 10 previous cases to form a cluster at Westlight Toh Guan Dormitory.
In other local news, our retail sector saw its first full month improvement since the circuit breaker. Official figures released today showed that retail sales fell 8.5% in July after revised 27.7% decline the month before. On a month-on-month seasonally adjusted basis, retail sales rose 27.4% in July because of a lower base in June. Statistics Singapore estimated total retail sales value at $3.3 billion in July, of which online retail sales made up 11%.
Public transport fares will not increase this year to help mitigate the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on commuters. In its annual revision announcement today, the Public Transport Council said that under normal circumstances, fares would have been hiked by 4.4% based on the current fare review exercise formula. But this will be carried over to the exercise next year instead, even as public transport operators face mounting losses. And up to 2 million Singaporeans will also continue to enjoy concessionary fares.
The National Arts Council said today that trials for small-scale live performances at selected venues will begin next Friday, September 11th. These limited trials will be held at venues managed by the NEC, Esplanade and Singapore Symphony Orchestra, among others. But not all the trials will be open to the public, and audiences are to be capped at 50. Safe distancing measures will apply and no interactions between the audience and performers or crew will be allowed.
A man charged with murdering his wife in Boon Lay will be remanded for psychiatric observation at the Complex Medical Centre in Changi Prison. Chinese national Chui Huan is accused of murdering Miss Liang Xue Chu, who was found motionless at the footpath at Block 211 Boon Lay Place on August 27th. If convicted, Chui faces the death penalty or life imprisonment with caning.
Separately, a former domestic worker has been cleared by the High Court of stealing more than $34,000 worth of items from Changi Airport Group chairman Liu Man Leong and his family. Miss Parti Liani appealed to the High Court against her conviction and sentence of 2 years and 2 months jail. Her lawyer argued that she was being framed to prevent her from lodging a complaint against the family for illegal deployment. The judge, in allowing her appeal, found that there was collusion by the family who had improper motives and wanted to stop her from going to the authorities.
From blue-collared foreign workers to white-collar expats, we know that Singapore is a good choice for overseas talent. And according to an HSBC survey from 2015 to 2018, Singapore was the best place to live and work for expatriates.
Ever since the Manpower Ministry announced the raising of qualifying minimum salaries for EP and S-Pass holders last month, the debate of local and foreign talent has re-entered the spotlight.
That's right. Well, entrepreneur and former NMP Kelvin Cheng weighed in on the issue in a Facebook post yesterday. Specifically addressing Singaporeans vying for top jobs in MNCs, he said that Singaporeans find it hard to climb to the highest ranks of MNCs and international companies, not because of their education or their abilities. He added that what holds them back is lack of international experience and big country experience.
He ended the post by saying, quote, "Instead of complaining of foreign talents taking your jobs, go to their countries and take theirs. Be the foreign talent, and when you come back, you will be a global talent. Otherwise, be prepared to be the villager who works for foreigners with such experience."
Well, Kelvin joins us now. He's the co-chairman of online corporate trading platform Retech Technology. Now, Kelvin, in a Facebook post yesterday, you wrote that a factor holding Singaporeans back from taking top roles in MNCs is their lack of international experience and big country experience, and not because of any lack in their education or ability. Do you think then that locals without this international or overseas experience cannot hold a candle to foreigners? After all, in PM Lee's Parliament speech this week, he brought up examples of Singaporeans who rose through the ranks of global companies and are in top positions.
I think the point I was trying to make is that in order to have more of a competitive edge, Singaporeans need to be exposed to regional and international roles. And unfortunately, because Singapore is a small market, if Singaporeans are only willing to work in local roles and handle only the local market, this experience would be limited. And at the top ranks of MNCs, whether regionally or globally, the competition is global. So if someone that only has experience in a small market is up against someone who not only has experience in several markets, but also experience in markets where tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people are being served, where products are being conceived for populations that are several times larger than Singapore, then they would naturally be at a disadvantage.
Right. Another interesting point in your Facebook post, you mentioned that Singaporeans should go abroad and grab top jobs overseas in order to be considered global talent. Now, hypothetical situation, I'm a local employee in an MNC. Now, my education and ability are on par with my foreign colleagues, but for whatever reasons, overseas experience isn't an option for me. Then how should I develop myself to stay competitive? For example, soft skills perhaps.
I think, first of all, there are many opportunities to work overseas, even in ASEAN itself. So even going to our northern neighbor like Malaysia or our southern neighbor Indonesia would give you exposure that you cannot actually get in Singapore. But I do understand that some people might have extenuating reasons why they cannot travel overseas, be these health or family. Then in that case, they would be naturally disadvantaged. But with digitization, there are still opportunities to take on a more global or international role. So if you could, with the help of the internet, or even working with companies that are primarily on the internet, still be able to serve a far larger market in Singapore whilst being based in Singapore, that would still give you the regional or international exposure that I spoke about.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Kelvin. We've been speaking to Mr. Kelvin Cheng, co-chairman at Retech Technology and a former NMP.
Let's now take a look at what's making headlines around the world. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said most state and territory leaders have recommitted to opening up the economy by December, but have yet to secure an immediate agreement to lift border restrictions that are crippling the economic recovery. Australia has fragmented along state lines, with many leaders barring travel from the two most populous states, New South Wales and Victoria, due to community transmission of COVID-19. Mr. Morrison is pressing for the states to agree on a definition of COVID hotspots to enable borders to reopen but allow more targeted controls on interstate travel.
Meanwhile, New Zealand is retaining its COVID-19 restrictions until at least mid-September as the country reported a new virus-related death in 3 months. Auckland will remain on alert level 2.5, which limits gatherings to no more than 10 people. Other parts of the country will be under alert level 2, which requires people to observe social distancing rules and restricts gathering sizes to no more than 100 people. The settings will be reviewed on September 14th.
Now check this out. Each day in Jakarta at 9 a.m. sharp, local government officials don full personal protective equipment, hoist a wooden coffin onto their shoulders and set out on a funeral procession down busy city streets. Wrapped in plastic, the coffin contains only an effigy. But as Indonesia struggles to contain a surge in COVID-19 cases, the authorities are trying to shop tactics to catch the public's attention and drive home crucial health messages in a country that has the highest virus death toll in Southeast Asia.
Meanwhile, Malaysia has dropped criminal charges against Goldman Sachs Group units, a key step in the $3.9 billion settlement agreement that allows the bank to move on from the 1MDB scandal. According to court proceedings in Kuala Lumpur today, the US bank was discharged, amounting to acquittal. The move marks progress in Goldman's efforts to resolve its worst scandal since the financial crisis.
US President Donald Trump strongly denied a magazine article that reported he had spoken disparagingly about the US war dead and declined to visit an American cemetery during a trip to France because he thought it was unimportant. The Atlantic said that Mr. Trump had referred to Marines buried in an American cemetery near Paris as losers and declined to visit in 2018 because of concern that the rain that day would mess up his hair. Mr. Trump told reporters that the story was fake. He said he did not go to the cemetery because the weather prevented a helicopter flight and the Secret Service objected driving there as it meant going through busy areas in Paris.
Well, those are our top stories for today, and for more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Join us next week for more stories on The Big Story. In the meantime, enjoy the weekend.